Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tatum, and I'm going to be focusing on drug trafficking, drug trade, like the violence that led to it, or the violence that was caused by it, and how that affects like daily civilian life in Colombia.
My name is Selena. I'm going to be focusing on Peru, and with that, I'm going to be looking at the distribution of land and how it stratified society or how it affected social classes and the economy, and specifically what happened within the indigenous population and how it affected them and their fight in the future to gain land.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I'm focusing on indigenous populations in Ecuador. Kind of seeing how they've been repressed over time and mistreated, and how that still translates nowadays to modern times, and what has changed and what still needs to be changed.
Hi, I'm Grace, and I'm going to be focusing on women's issues in Peru and the intersectionality of that with race.
So basically, what I want to take a closer look at is how the drug trafficking, and like more specifically the violence that surrounded it and the corruption that surrounded it, affected how, or affects still, how people view their government, how people live their daily lives, and how people kind of interact with one another and how people interact in society.
And then with mine, I really want to focus on indigenous groups and how Peru went from purely agricultural into like mining and plantation society, and how all that led up to like the 20th and now the 21st century. So it's really going to be analyzing that change over time. And so I want to focus on like agriculture, and then how the economy worked, how it was affected when it shifted from agriculture to mining and plantation, and how it affected indigenous groups. And so with that, how they've had to fight over time for their land, and like the oppression and unequal distribution of like rights and like property went with that.
Yeah, and relating to that with what kind of I'm taking a closer look at is the indigenous populations in Ecuador, obviously, but in Ecuador, the indigenous population is about like 13 million, which is roughly half of the population, so it's a really big group, but they're still put down at the bottom of the social hierarchy, as we saw like post-colonial times. And it's really interesting to see how over time, although like these peoples, it was their land and stuff, like everyone just came in and kind of took it from them. And it's interesting for me to analyze how from that we got to today's society, and just kind of like the entire chronicalization of that.
Yeah, and I was looking at women in Peru, and I started my research during the independence era, where most of the women fought to join the fight for independence, but through their kind of the constraints of their gender. So a lot of women worked within their homes and like as spies, because they weren't seen to be capable of doing anything, so they were overlooked. And then an example of like from the Creole perspective, someone like breaking against that gender barrier is Michaela Bacides. During the Tupac Amaru rebellion, there's a lot of evidence showing that she was behind the rebellion and planning it and organizing it. But then if you look at from an indigenous perspective, she was the wife to Tupac Amaru, and often the wives of leaders that were male were completely respected as leaders in the male's absence. So it shows that that's still within like the gender norms for indigenous culture. And then following kind of the different waves of feminist movements to now, where women are breaking out of the gender norms and also fighting against gendered violence within Peru with the Ni Una Menos movement, which is similar to the Me Too movement, and trying to fight against gendered violence in Peru.
Yeah, that's really interesting to see also, because we talked about the feminicide in class in Guatemala, and so it's really interesting. It'd be interesting to understand like how it's different in Peru, but also the same.
And like connecting it to it's happening, similar movements happening all across the Americas. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then I think another thing I kind of want to look at is like the era of neo-colonialism and how that affected Peru. Just because I don't know that much about it, and so it'd be interesting to see.
Be interesting to learn about.
Yeah, and like the influence of like the U.S. and those powers and how they affected the economy and the land distribution, and then in turn indigenous populations within Peru.
Yeah, I think the U.S. Influence is definitely a really big thing to look at, like in all of our papers, and especially like how like maybe the war on drugs affected like even daily life in Colombia, like because it just played such a huge role in drug trafficking, and so like how the U.S. Involvement affected like even like the most mundane parts of Colombian life.
Exactly.